Captain Jace Harrow's head felt like a war zone of exploding neurons. Light flickered above him in irregular bursts, as if the spaceship itself were blinking in Morse code to announce its displeasure at his presence. He groaned, rolling onto his back and squinting at the ceiling panels that buzzed faintly with electric irritation. He tried to remember what had happened. Last thing he recalled, he'd been on a routine patrol above Sector Theta 9, and then, well, some alarmingly loud noises, sparks, and a sharp jolt that probably violated every safety protocol the military had written in neat, sober handwriting. Somewhere along the way, Jace was fairly certain that physics had personally insulted him. He sat up, or attempted to. Gravity here was uncooperative, oscillating between somewhat Earth-like and weightless with a chance of doom. That was when he noticed movement, small and hesitant, pressed against his chest. He froze. Whatever it was impossibly warm, disturbingly soft, and entirely too close for comfort. Slowly, very slowly, he opened his eyes. She stared at him, eyes like liquid silver catching the emergency lights. Her skin had the faintest glow, as though she were carrying a private moon beneath it. Her ears, long and curved like delicate bows of an ancient instrument, shifted slightly with her cautious breathing. She made a small, melodic sound, almost like a purr, only it didn't match anything in his auditory training manual. Good morning," he managed, voice croaky and uncertain. You're fully, aware you're touching me, right?" Her ears twitched. She blinked slowly, apparently considering his words. Then, with the faintest tilt of her head, she whispered something that sounded like music without rhythm. Jace tilted his own head back, squinting. He considered that he might be losing his mind. "Right," he muttered. "Crash-induced hallucination. Classic, must be the ration packs. Yeah, definitely." The alien shifted closer, ignoring his protests. Or maybe interpreting them as consent, Jace couldn't tell. He gave up on sitting upright. "Okay, fine," he muttered to himself. "If we're doing this, we're doing it your way, mysterious glowing forest elf." He rolled his eyes at the absurdity, only for her ears to flick in what could only be described as amusement. Jace's gaze wandered over the ship's interior. It was a bizarre blend of human and alien design, with metallic corridors smudged by the fingerprints of someone or something that had clearly had no respect for conventional engineering aesthetics. Holographic panels winked with fragmented displays, looping stuttered warnings in half a dozen languages. He tried to read one. Caution, structural integrity, forget it. The lights flickered again, and he realized with growing horror that this place was less a spacecraft and more an elaborate trap designed by someone who hated gravity. "I'm guessing your species doesn't do uniforms," he muttered, attempting humor. She didn't answer in words, of course, but her silver eyes narrowed in what he chose to interpret as judgment. "Right, no uniforms. That explains the well, yeah." He waved vaguely. "Completely, natural." She pressed closer, shivering. He felt the warmth radiating from her like a small personal sun. Jace's survival instincts kicked in despite the awkwardness. "Okay," he said aloud. "Step 1, keep the alien alive. Step 2, don't die of embarrassment." He clutched his head and groaned. The ship's floor vibrated faintly beneath them, reminding him that everything was fragile here, including him. Lyra, as he later learned to call her, tilted her head again, emitting a soft tone that Jace eventually interpreted as a question. "What do you want from me?" he asked, partly out of politeness and partly out of self-preservation. The answer came in her gesture. She shivered again and pressed against him, as if words were meaningless compared to shared warmth. He groaned, rubbing his face. "You're literally the reason they're going to have to write a new manual for first contact." The ship, apparently aware of the dramatic scene, shuddered violently, sending a flicker of sparks cascading from the ceiling panels. Lyra squeaked in surprise and, without a second thought, wrapped herself around him like a vine of ethereal light. Yes, cling away," he muttered sarcastically, trying to balance himself on the floor as gravity continued its mood swings. He considered shouting at the ship's AI, if it existed, for being a terrible host. Once they settled into a sort of precarious, floating truce, Jace decided he needed a survey. He pushed himself upright and gestured vaguely. "All right, glowing elf, let's see what we're dealing with. Structurally, technologically, or, socially if that's your thing." Lyra rolled her eyes, ears flicking, and followed him, levitating with a grace that made him feel like a lumbering human boulder. They stumbled into a corridor that glitched in and out of existence, as if reality itself were arguing over whether it wanted to maintain continuity. Jace tripped, landed on his face, and Lyra helped him up, only to lose her balance and tumble into him, both of them rolling across the metallic floor in a ridiculous heap. "Right," he muttered, breathless. "If anyone's watching this in the future, it's going to look very heroic." She snickered, a sound like wind chimes caught in a storm, and he had to admit it was contagious. Despite the absurdity, he noticed small details. Her fingers, long and nimble, interacted with the alien technology with astonishing precision. A console sparked as she touched it, but the display came alive, showing fragmented maps and what looked like star charts with blinking dots for navigational hazards. Jace whistled. "All right, impressive. You hack everything without touching a keyboard. Got it. I'm officially redundant." Lyra paused at one panel and pointed, her ears flicking toward a particular symbol. He squinted. "You mean that thing that looks like a neon donut? Yeah, probably important, or lunch, not sure." She nudged him with a slender shoulder, indicating he should move. "Fine," he muttered. "I follow the glowing elf. Adventure time." Minutes, or possibly hours, passed as they explored deeper into the ship, the tension between them slowly easing with each failed attempt at navigation, each spark of humor shared in the gravity-defying corridors. Jace caught himself explaining human gestures, handshakes, and sarcasm. Lyra responded with musical noises that he slowly began translating into approximate meaning. Somewhere along the way, the idea of her as just an alien melted away, replaced with recognition that she was a being of intellect, curiosity, and surprising stubbornness. When they finally paused in a chamber that looked like a cross between a laboratory and a lounge, the lights flickered overhead. Lyra looked at him expectantly, ears quivering. Jace smirked. "All right," he said, leaning against a console. "We're in this together, glowing elf. And if the universe is going to keep throwing us into terrifying and awkward situations, at least we have each other for warmth." He gave her a mock bow. She tilted her head, ears twitching, and for a moment they both laughed, a sound that echoed strangely through the metallic corridors of the dying ship. And somewhere beyond the failing lights and broken panels, Jace felt a spark of something unexpected. Survival was no longer just about getting out of the ship alive. Somehow, it had become about understanding her, about keeping her safe, and he admitted reluctantly, maybe, just maybe, enjoying the absurdity of sharing this impossible, dangerous, and slightly ridiculous moment with her. The ship groaned again, like it was disapproving of their laughter. Jace rubbed his face. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see how bad this ride gets tomorrow." Lyra leaned closer without hesitation, and he caught himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to find out. The corridor they stumbled into had the charm of a haunted funhouse with a mechanical grudge. Lights blinked in uneven rhythms, casting shadows that danced like anxious ghosts across the walls. Jace groaned as his boots clanked against the metal floor. Why does every abandoned ship have to have the personality of a cranky toddler? He muttered. Lyra, floating effortlessly beside him, let out a soft trill that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Her ears twitched in amusement, long and elegant, giving her an expression that was somehow both mischievous and serious at the same time. Jace raised an eyebrow. "You're judging me," he accused. She tilted her head, ears flicking as if to say, "You're not wrong." Their first stop was a control hub that resembled a mix between a laboratory and a zoo exhibit. Panels lined the walls, showing blinking lights, holographic star charts, and diagrams that defied simple explanation. One display projected what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of the ship's interior, though half of it flickered in and out of existence, and the other half looked suspiciously like a spaghetti diagram drawn by a mad engineer. Jace rubbed his eyes. "I swear, this map makes less sense than the briefing slides we got on alien diplomacy." Lyra reached out, her slender fingers grazing the floating controls. She tapped a symbol, and the map shifted with surprising fluidity, showing corridors he hadn't even noticed, spaces that appeared to defy gravity, and doors that seemed to open into. He wasn't sure if he should say this. Literal nothingness. "You make this look easy," he said, stepping closer. "I'd crash it in 5 minutes tops." She tilted her head, ears flicking, and hummed a soft tune that felt like amusement threaded with patience. Jace sighed. Great, laughing at me in a language I can't understand. Just what I needed. He followed her through a narrow passageway, their movements precarious because gravity here was, as usual, unreliable. One moment, his feet stuck firmly to the floor. The next, he was floating like a bewildered balloon in a wind tunnel. Lyra drifted alongside him, perfectly balanced, her glowing skin and elongated ears making her look like some ethereal creature he was certain humans should have only seen in holographic fairy tales. She gestured toward a panel above him, which flickered with erratic energy readings. Jace squinted. Oh, of course. Why would the unstable reactor core be anywhere but dangling above our heads like a cosmic chandelier? Perfect. Lyra laughed softly. The sound was light, musical, and entirely contagious. Jace couldn't help but grin, despite the tension. I should be panicking, he said, but instead I'm worried I might actually enjoy this. Don't judge me. She flicked her ears again, as if the notion was ridiculous, which only made him laugh harder. As they moved deeper, the ship seemed to become increasingly whimsical, almost as though it had developed a personality in its long years of neglect. Gravity fields fluctuated, causing objects to float and spin unpredictably. Jace ducked under a slowly rotating console that nearly smacked him in the back. Note to self: interstellar engineering may be the most passive-aggressive profession in the galaxy, he muttered. Lyra floated behind him, dodging with effortless grace, and then tapped a button on a console. Instantly, a series of doors hissed open, revealing a room full of floating orbs. Some glowed with a soft green light, others flickered like miniature stars trapped in glass. Jace blinked. Are those alien puppies or space lanterns? Because I'm terrified either way. Lyra giggled, the sound blending with the soft hum of the orbs. They entered what appeared to be a laboratory of some kind. Equipment hovered in midair, displays projected data in alien script, and vials of glowing liquids bobbed gently in zero gravity. Jace's eyes scanned the room, impressed despite himself. All right, glowing elf, show me what all this does without turning the lab into a nuclear fireworks display. Lyra's long fingers danced across a console, and a holographic schematic of the ship appeared. She highlighted sections in a flowing motion, pointing out which areas were damaged and which could be used for navigation. Jace tilted his head. I don't understand a word of this, he admitted. But judging by your gestures, I think you're saying, don't touch that or you die. Lyra made a soft noise that sounded like a snort, which he took as confirmation. At one point, Jace tripped over a floating tool, sending it spinning into Lyra's chest. She caught it effortlessly and raised an eyebrow at him, ears flicking in a way that screamed, "Really?" He held up his hands in mock surrender. It was a tactical error, he said. Clearly, I'll add it to my report. She hummed, amused, and floated ahead, leading him through twisting corridors that defied linear logic. He muttered under his breath about wanting to write a strongly worded letter to whoever designed this ship. They reached a chamber that seemed designed for relaxation, or perhaps alien recreation. Strange pods floated above the floor, glowing softly. Lyra gestured for him to sit, and he hesitated. Relaxation? At this point, I'm lucky if I survive 5 minutes without almost dying. She rolled her eyes, ears twitching. Fine, but just a few minutes. You might learn to enjoy it. Jace plopped onto a floating pod, which wobbled precariously. All right, I'll try. But if I die from laughter or low gravity, I'm blaming you. She floated beside him, leaning close, her presence oddly calming despite the ship's quirks. As they rested, she hummed another tune, this one slower, almost thoughtful. Jace, despite himself, tried to imitate it. His version was an awful, off-key mess, and Lyra's ears twitched in a combination of horror and amusement. You sound like a dying toaster, she seemed to say, and he laughed so hard he nearly floated off his pod. Noted, he gasped. We'll aim for less burning appliance impression next time. The hours blurred as they explored further. They encountered gravity anomalies that sent them sliding along walls, malfunctioning doors that trapped them momentarily, and panels that projected star maps with sudden flashes of alien constellations. Each time, Jace made sarcastic commentary, and each time, Lyra responded with amused hums or gestures that made him laugh despite the growing tension. He began to realize that humor was the only thing keeping him sane on this bizarre, floating, half-dead vessel. Eventually, they came to a large observation deck. The windows, or whatever equivalent this alien species used, showed an endless stretch of stars, twisted and colored by the ship's failing energy fields. Lyra floated close, touching the pane with delicate fingers. Jace leaned next to her, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. "You ever just look out and wonder why the universe has to be so complicated?" he asked. She made a low, melodic noise, which he interpreted as agreement. "Yeah," he said, "me neither. But apparently, that's why I get to float around in a spaceship with a naked, long-eared alien laughing at me. Lucky me." Lyra pressed slightly closer, ears brushing his arm. Jace shivered, partly from the cold drafts of the failing ship, partly because of the absurdity of the situation, and partly because he couldn't quite deny the comfort of her presence. Humor had softened the edge of fear, had allowed him to survive not just the physical dangers of the ship, but the emotional chaos of encountering someone utterly alien and completely trusting him. The observation deck's lights flickered again, but instead of panic, they shared a moment of quiet laughter, floating together in the surreal glow of failing technology and distant stars. Jace realized that this was the first time in what felt like centuries that he had laughed without thinking about death or orders or strategy. He glanced at Lyra, ears twitching in a way that suggested she noticed too, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of the universe felt lighter. Somewhere deep inside, Jace understood that their journey was only beginning. There would be dangers, gravity collapses, failing systems, maybe even hostile aliens. But for now, amid the chaos and humor, a fragile bond had formed. One human and one long-eared alien, surviving together in a ship that seemed determined to kill them at every turn, yet offering glimpses of wonder, absurdity, and unexpectedly tender connection. And as the ship groaned, shifted, and sputtered into the void, Jace found himself thinking, not about survival, not about strategy, but about how utterly ridiculous and against all odds perfect it was to have Lyra floating beside him. Laughter in the void, warmth pressing against him in the cold silence of space. The ship shuddered violently, as if groaning in protest at its own continued existence. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and a low hum vibrated through the metal floors, warning of instability that was, quite frankly, entirely unsurprising to Jace by now. "Oh, fantastic," he muttered, gripping a support rail with one hand and trying to keep Lyra from drifting into a pile of dangling cables with the other. "If the universe wants to kill me, it really should invest in better lighting." Or maybe just a polite note, "Dear Captain, you're about to die," saves everyone a lot of trouble. Lyra gave a soft trill, which Jace decided was laughter, and he rolled his eyes. "I swear your species finds humor in the most dangerous situations. I admire it, hate it, probably both." They moved cautiously through the twisting corridors, which had begun to contort unpredictably due to failing structural integrity. Gravity fields fluctuated wildly. At one moment, Jace's boots adhered to the floor, and the next, he was airborne, spinning helplessly until Lyra reached out and anchored him with a single, graceful touch. Her ears twitched, catching the faint electrical surges from the panels, guiding them past hazards with almost preternatural precision. "All right, glowing elf," he said, winded from the latest zero-gravity tumble. "I admit it. I am officially useless without you." She made a soft, melodic noise that could have been amusement or gentle scolding. Jace grinned. "Yeah, I'll take that as agreement." The corridors led them to a chamber dominated by the ship's central reactor. A massive, humming core suspended in a field of energy that made the walls ripple and pulse. Sparks arced across containment units, and warning lights flashed a frantic sequence of red and orange. Jace's heart sank. "Okay, this is bad. Like, catastrophic humiliation level bad." Lyra's long fingers traced intricate symbols in the air, interacting with controls that defied his understanding of physics. Panels shimmered and shifted in response, stabilizing some of the energy surges. Jace blinked. "You're doing what exactly?" She hummed, her voice a symphony of tones that seemed to translate into the ship's language. After a tense moment, the reactor's roar calmed to a manageable hum, and Jace couldn't help but laugh, partly in disbelief. "I don't even know what you just did, but I am officially impressed." They had only moments to enjoy the temporary reprieve before another shudder ran through the ship, throwing them both against the wall. Floating debris jostled around them. Lyra caught a rolling console with ease, then helped Jace stabilize himself. He panted, brushing a spark off his sleeve. "You know," he said, trying to find humor amid chaos, "this is definitely not in my career manual." Chapter 6, Alien Rescue Missions. Subchapter B, Survive Explosions While Looking Cool, didn't happen, not once. Lyra's ears flicked in amusement, and he allowed himself a brief, genuine smile. Somehow, even in the threat of death, the absurdity of their predicament made it feel alive. They pressed on, navigating the unstable decks, encountering corridors that twisted impossibly and airlocks that refused to cooperate. Each obstacle tested their cooperation, forcing them to rely on each other in ways Jace had never anticipated. He had always trusted his training, his instincts, and his equipment. Now he had to trust Lyra, the alien whose form was delicate but whose mind was brilliant, whose presence had become both comfort and guide. He realized, with a slight jolt of humility, that he had never truly understood dependence until now. At one point, they encountered a floating cache of supplies. Lyra made a musical noise and gestured to some containers that held emergency rations and thermal suits. Jace grinned. Of course, because nothing says survival like free alien snacks and clothing I can't even pronounce. He tried to pull on a suit, which promptly floated half over his head before settling awkwardly around his shoulders. Lyra twirled in zero gravity, demonstrating the correct method to wear it, and he couldn't help but laugh. "All right, you win. I surrender to your superior alien fashion sense." She made another melodic trill, which he swore was a chuckle, and together they floated on, suits secured, ready for whatever the ship would throw at them next. Finally, they reached the escape pods. Jace glanced at Lyra. "You ready to hurl yourself into tiny capsules and pray they actually work?" She tilted her head, ears flicking as if asking him the same. "Well," he continued, "we've survived everything else, from gravity tantrums to spark showers. I think we can manage a tiny metal coffin with propulsion." She hummed agreement, and together they climbed into the pod, securing themselves. The console blinked alive with the pre-programmed escape sequence. Jace pressed the button to launch, feeling a strange thrill amid the fear. The pod shot forward, detaching from the failing ship just as it let out a final, sputtering groan. Outside, the stars stretched in infinite streams as the pod stabilized in space. Jace exhaled, slumping against the controls. "We're alive," he said, voice rough but relieved. Lyra floated beside him, glowing softly, ears twitching in quiet amusement. "Yes," she hummed, and for once, no complex symbols or translations were necessary. He understood completely. The journey back to safety was punctuated by quiet moments, floating together in the small pod, laughter mixing with shared awe at the universe around them. Jace found himself speaking more openly than he ever had, revealing fears, hopes, and absurd thoughts that had nowhere else to go. Lyra responded with gestures, hums, and touches that conveyed understanding without words. He realized he no longer feared vulnerability, at least not with her. Trust had become tangible, woven through their shared laughter, misadventures, and survival. When they finally approached a rescue vessel, Jace felt a bittersweet twinge of relief and loss. The mission was over, the immediate danger behind them, and yet a part of him mourned leaving the solitude and freedom of their shared microcosm. Lyra's eyes met his, silver and bright, long ears flicking in a gesture that seemed almost human in its tenderness. He reached out, and she mirrored him, their fingers brushing. In that touch was understanding, connection, and the knowledge that neither of them would ever forget the other. As they were pulled aboard the rescue ship, Jace allowed himself a full, unguarded smile. "Well," he said, voice full of exhausted humor, "next time, let's try surviving a derelict spaceship without almost dying or floating like idiots in zero gravity." Lyra's soft trill was answer enough, her ears flicking in amusement and agreement. He realized that he had changed. He had come aboard the derelict vessel as a trained soldier, cautious, rigid, and suspicious. He emerged with a new perspective. That survival was not just about tactics or strength, but about connection, trust, and the ability to laugh even when the odds were stacked impossibly against you. He had learned to rely on someone utterly alien, to find humor in danger, and to cherish warmth that went beyond the physical. Lyra, too, had changed. She had come seeking warmth and trust, finding a companion in a human who was brash, clumsy, and stubbornly courageous. Through shared danger, laughter, and quiet moments of understanding, She had learned that trust could cross the boundaries of species, that bonds could form in the most unlikely circumstances, and that even a human could be a source of protection, laughter, and companionship. As the rescue ship carried them back toward the light of human civilization, Jace glanced at Lyra. "You know," he said with a grin, "I think we make a pretty good team. Chaos, laughs, near-death experiences, we check all the boxes." Lyra's ears twitched in amusement, and her soft trill carried a tone of agreement, which made him laugh. For a brief, perfect moment, the universe felt vast, dangerous, absurd, and beautiful all at once. They had survived, they had laughed, and they had discovered something neither of them could have predicted. That even in the void of space, in the chaos of failing technology and fractured gravity, warmth, trust, and connection could be found. And that sometimes, survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant living, laughing, and learning to rely on each other, even when everything else seemed determined to tear the stars apart. Jace's hand brushed hers again, and he felt the gentle acknowledgement of their bond. The stars stretched infinitely before them, and he knew that together they could face whatever else the galaxy chose to throw their way. The derelict ship, the dangers, the absurdity, it was all behind them now. Ahead lay the unknown, but for the first time in his life, Jace felt ready, not because he was trained or armed or strong, but because he had found someone to share the chaos with, and laughter, warmth, and trust along the way. And as the rescue vessel carried them toward home, Jace and Lyra sat side by side,